Let me give you a very simple example of financialization, right?
Please.
Because it's not just buying shares. That has been happening now for 500 years. This is nothing new, buying and selling shares. It's a kind of gamble to buy and sell shares, but that's not financialization. I'll tell you what financialization is. Sometime, decades ago, financiers developed contracts that actually made some sense. So if you're a farmer and you face uncertainty, you may have a very bad crop, it's good to have an insurance company that provides you with an insurance contract that essentially allows you to cut your losses if things are not good. So this is a futures contract. Essentially, you buy the right to sell your produce at a certain minimum price so that if next year the price falls below, at least you get that. And it's like an insurance company. It's like, you have an insurance for your car. If there's an accident, you get some money back. You don't get everything. There's an excess, right? But you get something. So you hedge against bad things happening. So these insurance contracts became then transformed themselves into options to sell shares. So moving away from agriculture, imagine you are a financier and you purchase £1 million worth of British Aerospace shares, right? You can hedge, you can reduce your risk by saying, okay, I just spent £1 million on these shares, but I will buy a contract that essentially allows me next year, if I want to get rid of them, say the share price crashes, that I can sell them for at least 800,000. So far, so good. But then they thought, okay, well, if we are selling people, financiers, an option to sell, why don't we sell them an option to buy? That becomes more interesting and more lethal. Because suddenly you can pay money that allows you not to sell, but to buy in the future shares that you have not purchased today, right, at a given price. So effectively you are betting that the price will go up. And as long as stock exchanges go up, because governments privatize everything and they allow, and they allow the bankers to lend money to people to buy more shares and so on. That's a guarantee. That's what happened with Thatcher after 1981, 1982, the big bang in the city of London. Essentially, you are guaranteeing that the stock exchange will go up, and then you're giving people a reason to keep buying options to buy. And then you think, why am I buying shares at all? I'll just buy options to buy. But then, because if you buy if you have $1 million, instead of buying $1 million shares worth of British Aerospace shares, you buy 10 chunks of these options to buy, no shares. You place 10 bets that the price will go up. If the price goes up, then you have turbocharged your winnings compared to what you would have gotten had you bought the shares. But so that's financialization. Now, people ask me, how come Barclays Bank went bankrupt in 2008, or Lloyds Bank, or the Royal Bank of Scotland, which became more bankrupt than the whole of the planet Earth could possibly be? The answer is because if you keep borrowing money from American banks to buy these options to buy, and you effectively have turbocharged both your prospective winnings and your prospective losses. So as long as the going was good, RBS was the biggest company in the world. And then one day, the stock exchange started going down because of Lehman Brothers. All the loans were called in, the options to buy blew up, and then you are still paying for the bailout of the Royal Bank of Scotland. That's financialization. It's a massive gambling extravaganza where all the profits go to the financiers and all the losses go to you and to your generation and to your children's generation and so on. Well, primarily, of course, it rests in the hands of those who own everything. So, if you own huge tracts of land or, the majority of shares in one of those hedge funds that own everything else, then you have the power. If you're a banker, you have a lot of power, especially if you're bankrupt. Because the more bankrupt you are as a banker, the more of a threat you are to society, and the more likely it is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer will bail you out, sight unseen. I'll answer your question, however, in two doses. The first, again, on a macro-historical context, in a macro-historical context, if I may. Okay, so if you think about it, before the 18th century, before capitalism emerged to replace feudalism, under feudalism, power was homogeneous. It was one thing. There was a unity. So if you were the king, you were rich, and you had military power, and you had political power, and you had all the power you wanted, right? You could take people's heads, and you were only feared the usurpers who would behead you and take your place. But power was unified. It changed hands, but it was one sphere, one realm. With the beginnings of the great transformation from feudalism to capitalism, suddenly you have a schism, that you have a split of that unitary power into two realms, the political realm and the economic realm. So you had merchants in Southampton who had become stinking rich because of the expanding trade of wool that was being carried in their ships from Southampton to India, for spices, for silk, and so on. Suddenly these people, who were not allowed anywhere near Buckingham Palace or the House of Lords, they were just filthy merchants as far as the aristocracy was concerned. But nevertheless, they had more money than the aristocracy. So you have this split between economic and political power. Then, after 1971 and the breakdown of what was the first post-war financial system called the Bretton Woods, if you recall, you have the emancipation of the bankers from politics. So financial power splits from economic power. So now you have three realms. You have the political realm, you have the economic realm, industry, manufacturing, and then you have the bankers, the financial realm. And power goes from the political sphere to the economic sphere, finally to the financial sphere. Every time it migrates, the political sphere becomes less powerful. And essentially, the Prime Minister or the President of the United States is right to say that he has, usually he, not always he, less power today than their predecessors had 20, 30 years ago. So that is correct. However, remember the lockdown? Remember the pandemic? Suddenly we realized that states, governments, parliaments have enormous power. They can actually lock us down and into our homes. So, Mr. Sunak, I understand that generally, it is true that you have less power than Winston Churchill had, who had less power than Lloyd George had. But mate, you have power to do incredible things, but you are not using it, because the reason you are there is because you are representing the interest of capitalists who have put you there so as not to do anything, except what they instruct you to do in terms of tax cuts, in terms of all the props that they need from Parliament in order to enhance their capacity to extract value from others. Last year in April, there was a dreadful train accident in Greece, in Thessaly. 57 young people died on their way to university. Why did that happen? Because of the privatization of our railways. What model did they follow? Thatcher's model. And what was Thatcher's model? The first thing she did was to denounce state corporations as inefficient, as monopolistic, as awful, terrible, British Rail, British Gas, British Electricity. By the way, they worked much better than they do today. Or the Water Board, my goodness, much better. I mean, Britain was a pretty miserable place when I lived here, but it was, all these corporations worked better than they do today. You only need to take the train to go to Brighton or to go to Manchester to realize it. Okay, so she presented them as ancient and archaic and arthritic, in need of modernization. What was the modernization? You break up the network. You create one company that owns the tracks, and then other companies that own the rolling stock, and so on. And remember what happened immediately after that. King's Cross. You had the massive railway accident, because it's if you have one company owning the tracks and another owning the rolling stock, it's a little bit like you and me driving a car together, you steering and me using, having the throttle controls and the brake controls. We are going to crash.
I think we do quite a good job I understand the analogy you're making.
Together, we are not going to do a good job.
Do you reckon?
The chances of an accident are significantly boosted.
They are.
So, electricity markets. We should never have an electricity market. The notion of an electricity market is a crime against logic, because it can never be competitive. Never. Why? Because in the studio, in your home, there's one electric wire that comes out, okay? And you take that electricity. If you had the possibility of having 50 electric wires, imagine 50 different networks of wiring through the city of London, right? And you would say, oh, this is cheaper today, I'll take that one. Then maybe you would have a market. But with electricity, you can't. So there's one wire coming out, and the government has to simulate a market, which takes the form of some kind of auction house, when different private companies that produce or carry electricity or sell electricity supposedly compete with. They don't compete. It's a cartel. It's like OPEC. They cooperate fully in order to skin you. So how did we get electricity markets across Europe now? I mean, the reason why we have this massive cost of living crisis, part of it, is because we have electricity markets. If you look at their profit rates in Britain, in Germany, in Greece, in Austria, in Italy, during this crisis, after the war in Ukraine in particular, right, their profits are going up. Why should their profits be going up? The answer cannot be that natural gas has become more expensive. That's a cost. I understand price going up in sync with the cost. But when they tell me, and they celebrate this in the stock exchange, that profit rates are going up, it means that prices are going up faster than the costs, by definition, which means they're a cartel. That's why competition doesn't work. Where does this disaster come from? Margaret Thatcher. But wasn't she brilliant in the way that she managed to wipe the floor clean with the Labour Party, with the Liberal Party, with her own wets, and push all this in, and not only push this in, but cause an infection in the European Union, because every cynical and oligarchic policies introduced in this country is now in Greece, in Italy, in Portugal. Damning about the political party?
By all means.
It's the fault of the Labour Party in this country. It's the fault of the center-left across Europe. It's the fault of the Democrats in the United States. When you have a social democratic party, whether it is the SPD in Germany or the Labour Party here, which trades in a vision of a just society. And when they come to power, they turbocharge every oligarchic policy that they've inherited from the Tories. This causes two social phenomena. One is people become apathetic and stay at home, and they don't want to know about politics, or they become fascists. Not fascist in the sense of Mussolini's uniforms and so on, but become xenophobic. They become cynical. They start believing that Brexit is going to allow them to take back on control, when all it allowed was, for Mr. Johnson to become prime minister. It is the fault of the left, and I include myself in this. It is our fault. We must blame no one except ourselves. Think of the United States in 2008. Barack Obama was elected with a mandate to get rid of the Wall Street bankers and bail out the banks, because you can't let them fail. People's savings are in there, but we will get rid of the bankers. That was the cry call, which is what FDR, Roosevelt had actually done in 1933. Roosevelt had liquidated the bankers, not the banks, the bankers. And that's why the bankers really hated him. What does Obama do? He takes two gentlemen, Tim Geithner and Larry Summers, who were Clinton's duo in the finance ministry, in the US Treasury Department. The two men who had worked for Wall Street to unshackle the bankers and to let them go crazy, to the extent that it brought about the 2008 financial collapse. He takes these two men and gives them a mandate: save the bankers. And they print together 12 trillion American dollars to save the bankers. Do you know what the result of this is? This is a rhetorical question. Donald Trump. It's natural. I understand the blue-collar workers that Hillary Clinton deplorably called the deplorables.
Yeah.
When they say, look, we tried you. I mean, the idea that Trump was elected on the wave of racism, that's rubbish. Black people who voted for Barack Obama in 2012, 2008 and 2012, they voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. You know, that's why he got elected. There aren't enough racists and fascists in the United States to elect the president, even with the stupid electoral college system that they have. Mm. So, you know, in my country, when we presented, when I say we, I mean Syriza, the coalition of the radical left party, to which I belonged, and you know, with which I was elected to parliament in 2015 and became finance minister. We offered the people, after I had tried all different alternatives, we offered, as you put it, a meaningful, coherent, alternative plan of what needed to be done. And our party went from 4% to 36%, and we formed the government. And in the first 5 months, we stuck to our guns. We were true to the spirit of the manifesto that had gotten the mandate from the people. And when we crashed with the most powerful forces in the universe, like the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, Wall Street, the City of London, Frankfurt, the whole cabal of powerful people, and finances in particular, we held a referendum. And the question was, do you want us to keep fighting or not? Should we give in? Yes or no? And the answer was no. 62%. We had gone from 4 to 36 to 62, right? And what happened that night? My comrade and prime minister at the time decided to surrender, effectively to overthrow the people. The people had given him a mandate of... What was the mathematically inevitable outcome of that? The destruction of the left. The people they don't even want to look at me. I didn't betray them because I resigned that night. But you know what? They don't care. They say, you lot gave us hope, and then you betrayed it. And I don't care whether you signed or you didn't sign. So now what we have? We have fascists in parliament. We have an ultra-right-wing conservative party that is in cahoots with the fascists in government. And we have the left that is... we are reeling now, and we will be, sort of languishing in this magma of discontent and failure for another 10 years at least. But you know what? I think what you just said, which is completely correct, answers the question you put to me earlier about how is it that we are in a constant crisis of the capitalist economic order, and yet it's only the right that succeeds. Well, when the left is represented by somebody like Keir Starmer, what else do you expect? Especially when you have people like Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer that are struggling to present themselves as more royalist than the king, because they need to go the extra mile in order to prove to the establishment that they're not a threat to them. So in a sense, they're going to be more right-wing than the Tories, because the Tories don't need to prove to the establishment that they're Tories. So they can give a little bit more money to the NHS without being taken to task by the murdered press, right? Mm. I very much fear that the Keir Starmer Labour government, you see, many people say to me, come on, Yanis, but Labour will be better than the Tories. No, not necessarily. When it comes to Ukraine, the never-ending war of Ukraine. I mean, Keir Starmer, more so than Sunak, seems to believe that we have to, as the West, we have to keep going until we take Moscow. Without our soldiers fighting, Zelensky's soldiers taking Moscow, that means a never-ending war. That's Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has been complicit in the genocide in Gaza from day one to this very moment when we're chatting. Mm. So why would the Tory government be worse?
A fair question, I think. Before we...
And you know what? I prefer to have bastards in power who claim to be bastards representing the aristocracy than bastards in power who claim to be representing the working class.
and in denial of their status as bastards. Before we draw this to a close, I'd like to talk for a few questions, if we may, about the crisis in Gaza that you just mentioned. The situation in Rafah is worsening. More than 1 million people, displaced people there now. The shelling has started, the bombardment has started. How conscious should we be in the West of the decision that came out of The Hague, that there is the potential for a genocide being caused in Gaza at this moment in time? And do you think that Israel's current actions, specifically what's happening in Rafah right now, constitute, well, I mean, you did just use the phrase, but I'd like you to expand on it, a genocide?
The genocide started in 1948. It's simply becoming more lethal, more bloodthirsty, less bearable than it ever was. The complicity of the West is mind-numbing and indisputable. Here you have an apartheid state. It is clearly an apartheid state. Anybody who's been to the West Bank knows it's an apartheid state. They've built walls and they've built roads exclusively for the use of the illegal settlers that the local population cannot use. That's apartheid. So you have an apartheid state which has always tried to merge the Zionist ideology, the Zionist narrative, with the facts on the ground. The Zionist narrative from the 1910s was a land without a people for a people without a land. In other words, terra nullius is what the British did in Australia. They said, Captain Cook arrives and declares that Australia to be empty of people. So the Aborigines are not people, so kill them. Right? Genocide. It's the first step. Terra nullius is the first step towards genocide. So that's the Zionist project. A land without a people for a people without a land. Now, of course, there were people there. There were millions of people there.
There were.
So now the IDF is in the process of ensuring that the Zionist allegory, slogan, becomes a fact on the ground. They're getting rid of them. The whole point is to expel them, to kill them, to drive them away. They do not want to kill them all. I mean, they want to kill as many as is necessary to convince the rest to leave. You can see that in the West Bank, because people say to me, but Yanis, how can you possibly support Hamas? I'm not supporting Hamas. Netanyahu supported Hamas. Likud and Netanyahu were in the business of diminishing the authority of the PLO, and they have been for decades supporting Hamas, financially, politically, militarily, until they completely destroyed the capacity of the PLO, of the Palestinian Authority, to appeal to the Palestinian people, and only Hamas is left to represent them. And in any case, let's say that we press a button and Hamas disappear. They just disappear. They're all convinced. They're brainwashed by some wonderful piece of artificial intelligence delivered by drones, to give up, to surrender. What happens in the West Bank? Hamas are not there. The ethnic cleansing, the genocide is continuing there. And of course, you can see that they just want the land, not to mention the natural gas deposits, which are off Gaza. So this is what's happening. The West, especially those who claim to care about human rights, we must accept that we have now proven beyond dispute that we never cared, as countries, as polities, as establishments, as media, about human rights. We only cared about our human rights and the human rights of our friends, of our bastards, right? If you are not one of us, you don't have human rights. You can be bombed, you're never killed. Even if we kill you, you die. Whenever they say, hang on, what's happening? They are terrorists, right? So, never before has the West's image around the world been so terrible. What is happening is, at once, in the West, opinion, public opinion, conventional wisdom is solidifying its support for Israel's genocide, but the rest of the world is becoming more and more disillusioned with the so-called principles or ethical dimension of the Western polity, of the Western way of thinking.
You mentioned drones there, and I would like to, if we have time, to cover the intersection of sort of techno-feudalism and this conflict. But can we just hone in for a second on sort of the shifting of Israel's stated war aims? Because initially we were told it's the destruction of Hamas, right? Which poses its own questions, because does that mean the military infrastructure? Does that mean the nurses that are employed in the Hamas-run health ministry, for example? But that was the initial stated aim. And gradually the rhetoric has changed to security control in Gaza. The rhetoric is shifting. And I wonder, first of all, what you believe the actual war aim is for Israel. And secondly, whether you think that aim is achievable.
The original war aim has always been to take over the land from the river to the sea as part of a greater Israel, to expel half of the Palestinians and to keep the other half as bonded slaves. That was it. The original apartheid idea of the white supremacists, the Boers in South Africa. That's why we call it an apartheid state. That was always the case. Up until the 7th of October, that plan was working magnificently, because you and I were not even discussing Palestine, at least not to the extent that we are. Especially public opinion worldwide had accepted that it was over, that Israel had won, that the Palestinians in Gaza were fading. 60% of children before the 7th of October were malnourished. So the embargo was effectively killing them softly, slowly. And it was just a matter of time before, the people living there would want to get out. And the land would be cleared, and there would be settlers and so on. While in the West Bank, you had something like 200,000 settlers 10, 15 years ago. Now you have 800, 900,000. So they keep settling. They go straight from Boston or Brooklyn, or they go straight to a house of a Palestinian that has been thrown out of his home illegally in occupied land. So that was the aim. On the 7th of October, Hamas's actions shook the military establishment, the intelligence establishment in Israel, because they realized that they had not contained them to the extent that they had hoped they would. But that was a magnificent opportunity for them, essentially to kill lots of Palestinians, and to use that setback in their intelligence community as an opportunity for speeding up the process of genocide. That's what it is. And as far as Netanyahu is concerned, his war aim is that the war doesn't end. An endless war, because he knows that the moment it ends, he loses the prime ministership. And you have Biden, Scholz, Macron, Rishi Sunak supporting this war criminal. Therefore, they are war criminals themselves.
I'm glad you mentioned the international leaders in connection to this, because I wanted to get your thoughts on how realistic international pressure is in possibly bringing about an end to this conflict. Whether that's...
I don't see the international pressure. Where is it?
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you.
Where is it? Mr. Borrell, the ridiculous supposed foreign minister of the European Union, the High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, gave a speech for the first time which was critical of Israel. And he said that they've gone too far. They've gone too far in Gaza, right? And how can they kill these people? They are sending them the weapons, the bombs that are being dropped on Rafah as we speak. How dare he? How dare you, Mr. Borrell, ask such a question? You are arming the hands that are killing the Palestinians, and you have the audacity to question why is it that they are continuing to do it. You're giving them every reason to be doing it. President Biden came the other day out and said something similar, that they've overdone it. If he orders today that the American army ceases to support through the satellite system, through delivery of armaments, spare parts for their planes, and of course these gigantic bombs that are being delivered daily to Israel by the American military, the war will end tomorrow.